In this video, you've got to start somewhere and not go backwards. With the start of this new year, 2020, I think it's really important if you're interested in getting into this hobby, this painting miniatures and stuff like that, or if you are interested in getting back into it after a long time lapsed. It's important to understand a few simple things about what makes progress. As you paint more and more and practice, because all painting is practice, you will find that you will get better. Now, some of you don't believe me, and I understand that. And there are times when you hit plateaus, which I've talked about in the past, where you get to a point where you don't see your skills kind of increase, but at least if you're someone like me or a lot of other people that I've talked to over the years, you do find that your speed begins to increase, which is, kind of going back to that whole quality versus quantity situation. If you can paint more people quickly, that's its own quality kind of by itself. Nonetheless, the idea here is getting started and moving forward and not looking backwards. What I mean by that is, as I was cleaning my basement recently, I found this model. This is very probably one of the first. I can't say it's absolutely the first model I ever painted. And I did paint model cars and model airplanes and things like that when I was a kid. And I did those with, those tester the tester enamels and the little glass bottles. But this particular Battletech, it's an Atlas, is part of the first group of gaming miniatures that I ever painted. And referencing those little square glass bottles of enamel, this guy's painted in enamels. He's not painted in acrylics, which is what you normally paint miniatures with. But I painted him with what I had because I didn't know any better. There was no YouTube. There was very little internet when I did this. And so, I come across this guy just recently and I'm like, wow, I haven't seen this model in 20 years. And the first thought that went through my head was, I should strip it and repaint it. And that's going backwards. Taking a model that you find that you painted a long time ago, back when you were not as good as you are now, and looking at it and saying, what I should do is I should strip all the paint off of this and repaint it. I personally feel in almost all situations, not completely all, but in almost all situations, I find that is, to some degree, it's wasted progress. When you take a model that you've already painted once and you did a terrible job, they're not all bangers. That's the way that it works in this hobby. Every once in a while, you're going to paint something kind of meh, especially when you first start. That's just the way it works. I'm a terrible piano player because I've just barely started. So in that situation, you have to take it into your mind and go, this is not going to be a good song that I'm trying to play because I'm just learning. Same with miniatures, same with pretty much any kind of hobby. If you were going to sit down and try to figure out how to take this model and make it what you've got in your mind, you are limited by your skills when you start. So when you take a look at a model from the past that you did back when your skills were lower, and now you look at it and you go, I could repaint that and really do something special with it and make it look great. You're not wrong, but you're not thinking towards the future. If you're one of those folks who just plays one miniatures game, like a skirmish game, you just play a skirmish game, you have one army for that skirmish game, and that's it. I've probably never met you because pretty much every single miniatures gamer out there that I meet plays more than one army, in probably more than one game, in more than one style of game. And so even though you're playing maybe, let's say, a skirmish game like Malifaux or Kill Team or Star Breach or whatever, you build yourself a war band and it's maybe only 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 models and you can work on it. But now you want to build another one. And then you've got this other game that you want to build some stuff for. And then eventually maybe you get to the point where you start looking at army games and then that's a lot more models. And so taking time out of your relatively limited hobby allotment of time and taking it and going back to touch up old models. Touching up is a different thing. Sometimes if you paint something very quickly because you got to slam through it to get it ready for some sort of event, in a tournament or just a get together, and you want to slam through it, going back and touching up relatively quickly after you've kind of painted it to hit the deadline, that's fine generally because you do learn things as well in that. But taking a model, like I don't play Battletech. You know what I mean? So looking at that model and going, boy, I'm a better painter than I was back then, obviously. So I should repaint that. it just stops my forward progress on getting done the guys that I need to get for the next game and the next game and the more models that I keep buying. When you go backwards and paint some stuff in your past, it's backwards in your hobby progress as well. So taking that into consideration, looking at an older model, especially if it's something you don't play with anymore, and saying, boy, I really like to repaint that. I guess if you have an inordinate amount of time on your hands, then knock yourself out. But most of us don't. Most of us have a certain allotment of time every day, or maybe every week, whatever, that you can sit down and work on the stuff that you want to paint so that you can move forward and have more armies or more skirmish crews or war bands or whatever ready for your next game. Now, don't misunderstand. I am not saying that absolutely out of hand you should never repaint old models. If you really, really have some amazing attachment to it, and let's say the model has been lost for 20 years, as was that Atlas floating around in the bottom back of a drawer that I had completely forgotten about, and just like a lot of nostalgia and whatever, great. Then if you want to take the time, if you've got some time in between projects and you want to attack that, that's fine. Honestly, when I first looked at that model, my first thought was, this is content. This is YouTubery at its finest. I could make some hay out of this. And I don't know that I'm going to, but I could, potentially. But for most of us who are not content creators, the idea is more just like, boy, I would like to show myself that I am better than that, than past self. Present self is way better than past self. You don't need to think that way. Generally, present self is better than past self. You should be going in that direction. So you don't have to prove to anyone that you're better than you were. Now, if, let's say I was getting into, let's say I started playing Battletech again or something like that, and I found this model and the model was out of print and the model was, you couldn't find it anymore, whatever, that kind of stuff, then there are extenuating circumstances where it kind of makes sense. And don't get me wrong, I strip models pretty frequently. I just never strip my own. I find models on eBay that are going to be perfect for a project that I am working on right now going forward. And I find that model and I strip the paint off of it so that I can paint it now at the level that I'm at now and then move forward and have stuff. It's just a cheaper way in some situations to find the models that you need. Or sometimes you're finding models that you just don't find anymore because they're not for sale. But when you take your own models, and I got to be perfectly honest with you, I don't think I've ever done this. I have this tendency to, number one, never sell models I've painted. If I get into a game and then I tend to fall out of that game, I'll sell the models perhaps that I have not painted or whatever. But any models that I've painted, I hold on to. But I've also never gone and stripped one of my own models and repainted it. If you sprayed on the stuff, the varnish, and it all, or something spilled on that model, or something terrible happened to it, whatever, then I can understand wanting to go back and strip and do over. But if it's just because it's an old model that you didn't have the skill then that you have now, I would tell you to leave it alone. I would tell you to maybe set it on a shelf if it's a game you're not playing and let it sit there. And it becomes kind of a reminder. If you can set it on a shelf kind of within view of your hobby station, it can really help. Remembering that not every last thing that we will ever do is the best is an important thing to help us keep moving forward so that we can get better. That sounds kind of odd, but striving forward is important, but understanding that sometimes in your striving you miss is also important. But it still gives you the experience. People talk about how every failure is a learning moment, and it's the same type of thing in miniatures. So when you look at some of your what you term failures, because at the time I thought I was relatively clever with Mr. Atlas there, because I kind of made him wash out of like a black paint with some thinner, whatever the heck you have to use for enamel. I don't remember anymore. Turpentine? I don't know. And I was trying to make my own wash to fill in all the little crevices and stuff like that. It didn't particularly work, but it sort of worked a little. So I was like, hey, this is great. Nowadays, obviously, I would have different arrows in my quiver within the hobby to be able to make him look a lot different. So maybe if I can find another Atlas out there, maybe I'll paint that one. But again, like I said, I don't play Battletech, so it's not necessarily high on my priority. Being a painter who also likes to play, though I paint more than I play, I do like to paint things that I'm going to play with. Now, if I was a person who was completely into just only painting for display purposes, now we're talking different story. You may find some model that's out of print or a bust that you painted years ago, and now you want to give it a try again, and that's fine. Because in that situation, you are at least moving forward in the hobby. But when you are having a goal of getting painted armies on the table, it's always important to keep in mind the idea of getting models done to make it so that you can have painted models on the table to impress your friends, impress yourself, have fun with. Painted models roll better, ask anyone. And, taking all that into consideration, forward progress is always more important than looking back.